The steam of the Union Pacific engine hissed like a coiled rattlesnake against the Wyoming cold. Clara had her boot on the iron step, a one-way ticket to Philadelphia clutched in trembling fingers. Escape was seconds away. Then a bloodied hand slammed against the iron rail, and a voice she thought she'd never hear again rasped through the smoke. "Give me one chance, just one." The year was 1882, and the town of Cheyenne, Wyoming Territory, was a cacophony of ambition and desperation. Dust hung thick in the air, catching the late afternoon sun and turning the sky a bruised, violent purple. At the bustling Union Pacific depot, the chaotic symphony of iron wheels, shouting porters, and lowing cattle painted the backdrop of Clara Montgomery's great escape. She stood on the wooden platform, the heavy wool of her traveling cloak suffocating in the dry heat. Clara wasn't leaving for a Grand Eastern tour. She was fleeing. For 3 generations, the Montgomery family had run the Broken Spoke Ranch, a sprawling expanse of grazing land that rested stubbornly in the path of the region's wealthiest, most ruthless cattle baron, Josiah Collins. When Clara's father, Thomas Montgomery, passed away suddenly just 2 months prior, officially of a heart failure that no doctor could quite explain, Collins had swooped in with the predatory grace of a hawk. He produced ledgers, promissory notes, and deeds bearing Thomas's forged signature, claiming the Broken Spoke was drowning in debt. Collins offered Clara a devil's bargain: marry him, merge the lands, and save her family's legacy, or face absolute ruin and eviction by the territory marshals. Clara had chosen a third option. She had secretly liquidated her mother's jewelry, packed a single valise, and bought a ticket east. She was leaving the dust, the blood, and the ghosts behind. Most of all, she was leaving behind the memory of Wyatt Dalton. Wyatt was the Broken Spoke's top horsebreaker, a man whose hands were scarred by leather and barbed wire, yet gentle enough to calm a wild mustang with a whisper. He was a man of infuriating silences and piercing storm-gray eyes. For a year, a quiet, forbidden romance had bloomed between them in the shadowed stalls of the barn and beneath the endless canvas of the starlit prairie. Wyatt had promised to stand by her when her father died. He had promised to fight Collins. But 3 weeks ago, on the very night Collins delivered his ultimatum, Wyatt had simply vanished. He took his roan gelding, his Winchester rifle, and left without a word, abandoning Clara to face the wolves alone. The betrayal had hollowed her out, leaving only a cold, practical resolve to survive. "All aboard. Final call for Omaha, Chicago, and points east," the conductor bellowed, his voice cutting through the roar of the steam engine. Clara took a deep breath of the coal-scented air. She lifted her skirts and placed her foot on the iron step of the passenger car. "Clara!" The voice was ragged, torn at the edges, and practically swallowed by the hiss of the train. But Clara's heart recognized it before her mind could process the sound. She froze, her knuckles turning white around the handle of her valise. She turned slowly. Pushing his way through a throng of businessmen and soldiers was Wyatt Dalton. But he was not the stoic, confident cowboy she remembered. His Stetson was gone. His dust-covered duster was torn at the shoulder, the fabric dark and slick with fresh blood. He was limping heavily, clutching his side, his face pale beneath a thick layer of prairie grime. "Clara," he gasped, stumbling to a halt just inches from the iron steps. He reached out, his heavy, gloved hand slamming against the rail of the train car to keep himself upright. Don't get on that train." Clara stared at him, a tempest of relief, fury, and heartbreak raging in her chest. She forced her voice to remain ice cold. You have no right to speak my name, Wyatt Dalton, not after you rode out in the dead of night like a coward. I didn't run. He breathed, his chest heaving. He coughed, a grimace of profound pain twisting his rugged features. I had to go. If I told you, you would have tried to stop me. Collins, he had eyes everywhere on the ranch. You left me to face him alone. Clora's voice cracked, betraying the iron facade she was desperately trying to maintain. Tears she had sworn not to shed pricked the corners of her eyes. He took everything. He took the ranch, Wyatt. He took my father's good name, and you took my heart and threw it in the dirt. The train blew its whistle, a deafening, mournful shriek that rattled the wooden planks beneath their boots. The conductor waved a red flag near the front of the locomotive. "Clara, please," Wyatt pleaded, stepping closer. The smell of gun smoke, leather, and copper blood clung to him. He looked directly into her eyes, and she saw a desperate, haunting vulnerability there that shook her to her core. "I know I broke your trust, but I need you to give me one chance. Just one. Because if you get on that train, Josiah Collins wins, and your father's murder goes unpunished." Clora's breath hitched in her throat. The heavy valise slipped from her fingers, hitting the wooden platform with a dull thud. "What did you just say?" "Your father didn't die of a weak heart," Wyatt said, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper so the passing porters wouldn't hear. He leaned heavily against the train car, his strength visibly waning. "Collins poisoned him, digitalis in his evening whiskey, made it look like his heart gave out." "No," Clora whispered, stepping down from the iron stair. The bustling noise of the Cheyenne depot seemed to fade into a dull, rushing sound in her ears. "No," the doctor said. "The doctor is on Collins' payroll, Clora. Half this damn territory is," Wyatt spat, wincing as he shifted his weight. Clora reached out, instinct overcoming anger, and touched his torn shoulder. Her fingers came back stained with crimson. "Wyatt, you're bleeding. You need a doctor." "I need you to listen," he urged, grabbing her wrist gently but firmly. With his free hand, he reached inside his bloodied duster and pulled out a thick, leather-bound book. The edges were singed, and the cover was deeply scuffed. "This is why I left. I tracked a former bookkeeper of Collins's all the way to a saloon in Laramie. The man was running scared, drinking himself to death. He had this." Wyatt shoved the book into Clora's hands. It was heavy. "What is this?" she asked, her eyes darting between the ledger and Wyatt's pale face. "Collins's shadow ledger," Wyatt explained. "It details every bribe, every stolen head of cattle, and every forged deed for the last 5 years, including the hit on your father and the man he paid to slip the poison. I spent the last 3 weeks hunting this down, fighting off Collins' Pinkerton men to get it back here. It proves the broken spoke belongs to you, Clora, free and clear." Clora opened the book. The pages were filled with neat, meticulous handwriting, dates, names, sums of money. She saw her father's name. Next to it, a date and an entry. Payment to Doc Evans, $500, task completed. A cold, righteous fury began to replace the despair that had weighed her down for 2 months. Her father hadn't failed. He had been slaughtered by a thief in a tailored suit. "Why didn't you tell me you were going after this?" she asked, looking up at Wyatt, her voice trembling with emotion. "Because Collins' men were watching the house," Wyatt said, his eyes scanning the crowd around them with nervous intensity. "If Collins knew I was close to the truth, he would have used you as leverage. Or worse, he would have killed you to ensure the land merger went through. I couldn't risk it, Clara. I'd rather you hate me and live than love me and end up in the ground next to your father." The train whistle blew a second time, a short, sharp blast. The iron wheels shrieked as they began to inch forward. The massive locomotive was building steam, preparing to pull out of the station. "Ma'am, you boardin' or not?" the conductor shouted from the doorway of the passenger car. Wyatt stepped back, giving her space. "The train is moving, Clara. If you want to go, take the ledger to a federal judge in Philadelphia. It'll be safe there. You'll be safe. But if you want to stay, if you want to take back the broken spoke and watch Josiah Collins hang, stay with me." Clara looked at the train. The safe, civilized East was waiting. She looked at Wyatt, bleeding, exhausted, yet standing tall, having ridden through hell to bring her the truth. Before she could make her choice, a sharp crack echoed over the hiss of the steam. A bullet splintered the wooden paneling of the train car merely inches from Clara's head. The crowd at the depot erupted into screams. Men dropped to the dirt, women shrieked and dragged their children behind luggage carts. "Get down!" Wyatt roared. He threw his good arm around Clara, tackling her to the hard wooden planks of the platform just as a second shot shattered a window on the moving train, raining glass down upon them. Wyatt pulled her tightly against his chest, rolling them behind a towering stack of wooden freight crates stamped with the Union Pacific logo. Clara gasped for air, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She peered around the edge of the crate. At the far end of the platform, striding through the dispersing crowd with cold, practiced calm, were 3 men. They wore long dusters and dark hats pulled low. In the center was Deacon Cobb, Josiah Collins' most notorious enforcer, a man known for a lack of a moral compass and an unnerving accuracy with a Colt revolver. "Well, well, Dalton," Deacon Cobb's voice boomed over the noise of the departing train. "You made a hell of a ride from Laramie, but I told you that book belongs to Mr. Collins." Wyatt drew his heavy revolver from his hip, checking the cylinder with a quick, practiced flick of his wrist. "3 of them," he muttered, his breath hitching. He looked at Clara, his gray eyes filled with a sudden, devastating regret. "I'm sorry, Clara. I brought the devil right to your doorstep." The train was picking up speed, the caboose rolling past them. The escape route was vanishing into the Wyoming dust. Clara looked at the ledger in her hand, then at the blood stain in Wyatt's coat. The fear that had controlled her for months evaporated, replaced by the indomitable spirit of the Montgomery bloodline. She wasn't a victim anymore. "You didn't bring the devil, Wyatt," Clara said, her voice steady and fierce. She reached into her valise, which she had dragged behind the crates with her, and pulled out her father's pearl-handled Derringer. She clicked the hammer back. "You brought the match. Now let's burn him down." The wooden platform of the Cheyenne depot erupted into absolute chaos. The rhythmic chugging of the departing train was swallowed by the sharp, deafening cracks of Colt .45 revolvers. Clara Montgomery lay pressed against the rough, splintered wood of the freight crates, the heavy leather of the shadow ledger digging into her ribs. Beside her, Wyatt Dalton's breath came in ragged, shallow gasps. His face, normally tanned by the Wyoming sun, was the color of old parchment. "Stay low," Wyatt rasped, his voice tight with agony. He thumbed back the hammer of his own revolver, peeking around the edge of their wooden barricade. A bullet chewed through the corner of the crate, sending a shower of sharp pine splinters across Clara's cheek. She didn't flinch. The trembling girl who had tried to board the Union Pacific was gone, replaced by the daughter of Thomas Montgomery, a woman forged by frontier winters and unbreakable resolve. She gripped the cold, pearl handle of her father's two-shot Derringer. It was a gentleman's gun, meant for a vest pocket, but at close range it was a deadly equalizer. "Give it up, Dalton," Deacon Cobb's voice echoed across the platform, dripping with cruel amusement. "You're bleeding out like a stuck pig. Hand over the book, and I might let the little lady get on the next train to Chicago." "Go to hell, Cobb," Wyatt roared back, leaning out and firing twice. Through the haze of gun smoke, Clara saw one of Cobb's thugs, a broad-shouldered man named Jessup, stumble backward as Wyatt's bullet clipped his shoulder. He dropped his rifle with a curse, scrambling behind a baggage cart. But Cobb was a veteran of the bloody range wars, and he didn't panic. He gestured sharply to his remaining man, a wiry killer known only as the Kid. While Cobb laid down a blanket of suppressing fire, shattering the remaining glass on the station house windows, the Kid began to flank them, creeping along the edge of the tracks to get behind their barricade. Wyatt cursed, pulling his gun back to check the cylinder. "I've got 2 rounds left," he muttered, pressing his forehead against the crate. He looked at Clara, his storm-gray eyes softening for a fraction of a second. "When I step out to draw their fire, you run. You run straight to the marshal's office on 16th Street. Don't look back." "I am done running, Wyatt," Clara said, her voice dropping to a fierce, steady whisper. Before he could protest, the crunch of boots on gravel sounded directly to their left. The Kid had rounded the crates, raising a sawed-off shotgun with a wicked grin. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Wyatt tried to pivot, but his injured side gave out, sending him crashing to his knees. The Kid's finger tightened on the triggers. Clara didn't think. She moved. She lunged forward, thrusting her arm past Wyatt. She leveled the small Derringer directly at the Kid's chest and squeezed the trigger. The little gun kicked wildly in her hand with a sharp crack. The Kid let out a choked gasp as the small-caliber bullet struck him square in the collarbone. The impact threw off his aim. The shotgun discharged with a deafening roar, blowing a hole through the roof of the depot awning instead of Wyatt's chest. The Kid dropped the weapon and fell backward off the platform, landing in the dirt beside the tracks. "One down," Clara breathed, her hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline surged through her veins. "Well, I'll be damned." Wyatt managed a weak, blood-stained smile. Suddenly, a new voice boomed across the platform, a voice like rolling thunder, backed by the unmistakable clack-clack of a Winchester lever-action rifle chambering around. "Drop the iron, Cobb. You're surrounded by federal authority." Through the lingering smoke strode Marshal Gideon Shaw. He was a mountain of a man, an imposing deputy U.S. Marshal with a silver star pinned to his canvas coat and a reputation that made outlaws sweat from Denver to Deadwood. Behind him, 3 deputized townsfolk fanned out, their rifles trained squarely on Cobb and the injured Jessup. Deacon Cobb froze, his revolver still half raised. He looked at the marshal, then at the smoking barrel of Shaw's Winchester, and slowly let his weapon slip from his fingers. It clattered against the wooden planks. "Marshal Shaw," Cobb sneered, raising his hands in mock surrender. "You're interfering in private business. Mr. Collins ain't gonna like this." "Mr. Collins can take it up with the federal judge in Denver," Shaw growled, stepping forward to kick Cobb's gun away. He turned his attention to the crates. "Dalton, Miss Montgomery, you 2 alive back there?" Wyatt leaned heavily on Clara as she helped him stand. "We're alive, Marshal," Wyatt said, coughing into his fist. He gestured to the leather book in Clara's hands. "And we've got the shadow ledger, bribes, forged deeds, and the payout for Thomas Montgomery's murder. It's all in there." Marshal Shaw's eyes widened. He took the book from Clora, thumbing through the first few pages. A slow, grim smile spread across his weathered face. "I've been hunting Josiah Collins for 3 years. Every sheriff in this county is in his pocket. But this is federal evidence. This puts a noose around his neck." Cobb, kneeling on the platform with his hands locked behind his head, let out a harsh, barking laugh. He spat a wad of tobacco onto the planks. "You think a book matters now? You're too late." Clora stepped forward, her heart seizing. "What do you mean?" Cobb looked up at her, his eyes shining with malicious glee. "Mr. Collins didn't just send us to get the ledger, little lady. He knew Dalton was sniffing around. Collins is at the Broken Spoke right now with 20 men. He ain't waiting for you to sign over the land. He's burning the main house to the dirt. The original deed is in your father's floor safe. Once the house is ash, the deed is gone, and his paid-off county clerk is issuing him a new one by sundown. Eminent domain by way of a matchstick." The blood drained from Clora's face. The ranch, her home, the place where her mother was buried and her father had bled. "Marshal." Clora turned to Shaw, her voice trembling not with fear, but with a terrifying white-hot rage. "We have to stop him." "It's a 2-hour ride," Wyatt said, leaning against the crate, his strength fading fast. "He's already got a head start." "Then we ride hard," Clora declared. She looked at Wyatt, cupping his pale face in her hands. "Can you make it?" Wyatt looked into her eyes, finding the same unyielding prairie fire that had made him fall in love with her in the first place. He nodded slowly. "I'd ride through hell for you, Clora. You know that." Marshal Shaw snapped the ledger shut and tucked it into his coat. "Boys," he shouted to his deputies, "lock these trash up in the holding cells. Miss Montgomery, grab the fastest horses from the livery. We're going to the Broken Spoke." The Wyoming sun was beginning its descent, painting the endless sky in violent streaks of crimson, gold, and bruised purple. The thundering hooves of their commandeered horses tore up the dry earth as Clora, Wyatt, and Marshal Shaw crested the final ridge overlooking the Broken Spoke Valley. Clora's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Below them, nestled in the valley, was her home, and, rising from the sprawling wooden structure of the main house, was a thin, ominous plume of black smoke. "They're already here," Clora yelled over the rushing wind, spurring her mare faster down the steep incline. Wyatt rode beside her, practically tied to his saddle by sheer force of will. His face was a mask of pain, his torn duster flapping wildly in the wind, but his gray eyes were locked on the homestead. As they tore into the main courtyard, the scene was a nightmare of greed and destruction. A dozen of Collins' hired guns were tossing saddles and supplies out of the barn. On the wide, wraparound porch of the Montgomery homestead stood Josiah Collins himself. He was a sharply dressed man in a tailored broadcloth suit, a stark contrast to the rugged violence he commanded. In his hand, he held a kerosene lantern. A pool of dark, pungent liquid already soaked the wooden floorboards beneath his polished boots. "Collins!" Clora screamed, pulling back hard on the reins. Her horse reared, kicking up a cloud of dust as she slid to a halt just 30 yards from the porch. Josiah Collins paused, looking up with genuine surprise. He lowered the lantern slightly, a patronizing smile stretching across his face. "Clora, my dear, I thought you were halfway to Omaha by now. I was just doing a little spring cleaning." "Step away from my house, Josiah," Clora ordered, swinging down from the saddle. She didn't bother reaching for her empty derringer. She didn't need a weapon. She had the truth. Wyatt dismounted clumsily, gripping the pommel of his saddle to keep from collapsing. Marshal Shaw rode in right behind them, his Winchester resting easily across his lap. Collins' eyes flicked to Wyatt, and then to the silver star on Shaw's chest. The patronizing smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating scowl. Marshal Shaw, you're out of your jurisdiction. This is a private property dispute. Not anymore, Collins, Shaw called out, dismounting with a heavy thud. He reached into his coat and held up the leather-bound shadow ledger. I've got your bookkeeper's diary. I've got the record of the $500 you paid Doc Evans to slip digitalis into Thomas Montgomery's whiskey. I've got enough evidence to hang you 10 times over. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtyard. The hired guns, realizing the tide had suddenly and violently turned, began to slowly back away, lowering their rifles. They were paid to intimidate ranchers, not to shoot federal marshals. Collins stared at the ledger, his jaw clenching. The tailored suit suddenly looked too tight on him. His empire, built on lies and blood, was crumbling in the span of a single heartbeat. You think a piece of leather and some ink is going to stop me? Collins sneered, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. He lifted the kerosene lantern high. This land is mine. If I can't have it, no one will. He moved to smash the lantern onto the kerosene-soaked porch. No! Clora screamed, sprinting forward. But Collins was quick. In a last, desperate act of a cornered animal, he realized that if Clora died, the Montgomery bloodline ended, tying the land in probate hell for decades. He dropped the lantern, but instead of letting it shatter, he reached under his tailored coat and drew a hidden, snub-nosed revolver, aiming it directly at Clara's chest. Bang! The gunshot rang out, echoing off the canyon walls. But it wasn't Clara who fell. Wyatt had thrown himself forward with the last ounce of his strength, tackling Clara to the dirt just as Collins fired. The bullet tore through the fleshy part of Wyatt's upper arm, spinning him around. Before Collins could cock the hammer for a second shot, Marshal Shaw's Winchester roared. The heavy point .44-40 round struck Collins square in the right shoulder, spinning the cattle baron like a top. The snub-nosed revolver flew from his grip, clattering off the porch and into the dirt. Collins collapsed against the wooden railing, screaming in agony, his pristine suit instantly soaked in his own blood. Marshal Shaw racked the lever of his rifle, leveling it at the remaining hired men. Anybody else want to die for a man who pays in forged paper? The courtyard was dead silent, save for Collins's pathetic groans. One by one, the hired guns dropped their weapons and raised their hands. The reign of the Collins Empire was over. Clara scrambled to her knees, pulling Wyatt's head into her lap. She pressed her hands frantically against his bleeding shoulder, tears finally spilling hot and fast down her dust-streaked cheeks. "Wyatt, stay with me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You promised me, damn you. You promised me one chance." Wyatt coughed, a weak, breathless chuckle escaping his lips. He reached up with his uninjured hand, his rough, calloused fingers gently wiping away a tear from her cheek. I think I just took it, Clara." "You stubborn fool," she sobbed, leaning down and pressing her forehead against his. "Don't you ever leave me again." "Never," he whispered, his eyes closing as the exhaustion finally took him, but a peaceful smile remained on his face. "I'm home." Behind them, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the broken smoke in a soft twilight glow. The house still stood, the land remained, and the shadows of the past were finally laid to rest. The Wyoming spring breathed new life into the broken spoke. Josiah Collins rotted in a federal penitentiary, his corrupt empire dissolved. Wyatt Dalton, his scars proving his loyalty, stood beside Clora not as a hired hand, but as her husband. Together, they watched the cattle graze across the valley, their shared legacy forever secure. It was a kingdom forged in the fires of betrayal and bound by an unbroken love.